Hello beautiful people, welcome back. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe and leave a like, it means everything to us. Please share this video with someone you care about and switch on post notifications so you won't miss any future videos. Thank you for always supporting. Now, relax and let's begin. Peace Afolabi knew how to smile on command. At events, she stood beside Kelvin in elegant dresses, her hand resting lightly on his arm while cameras flashed and people praised them as a beautiful couple. You two fit each other, people often said. Kelvin would smile, nod, and pull her slightly closer, performing affection with the ease of a seasoned actor. But the drive home always told the truth. Once the doors shut and the world disappeared behind tinted windows, silence returned like a third passenger. Kelvin scrolled through his phone. Peace stared through the glass. Their marriage looked polished in public, but inside it had begun to crack in places nobody could see. At home, Peace still tried to keep warmth alive. She set the dining table carefully, folded Kelvin's clothes, and asked about his day with gentle patience. Sometimes he answered in one-word replies. Other times he acted irritated, as if even her softness offended him. "You ask too many questions," he muttered one night, loosening his tie. Peace forced a small smile. "I'm your wife, Kelvin. I'm supposed to care." He shrugged and walked past her. That shrug stayed with her longer than any insult. She missed the man who once lingered in the kitchen just to talk to her. The loss was slow, quiet, and deeply humiliating. Before the marriage grew cold, Peace had always carried a private dream. In a cream notebook she hid inside her wardrobe, she sketched ideas for a hotel she hoped to build one day. Not just any hotel, but a beautiful place where luxury would feel soft instead of arrogant, warm instead of intimidating. She imagined polished floors, fresh white flowers, careful lighting, gentle music, and workers trained to treat every guest with dignity. To Peace, hospitality was not just a business. It was comfort made visible. On lonely afternoons, she opened her notebook and wrote new ideas, letting herself believe that one day her dream would become brick, glass, marble, and light. One evening, she gathered courage and showed Kelvin a few pages during dinner. "Look at this," she said, eyes bright with nervous hope. "I've been thinking of a hotel that feels peaceful, not cold." Kelvin glanced at the sketches and laughed under his breath. "Peace, please. This is cute, but business is not for women who live inside feelings." She froze. "It's not just feelings. I've been reading, and..." He cut in sharply. "Focus on what you can handle." Peace nodded slowly and closed the notebook. She finished the meal in silence, but later that night, she held those pages to her chest and cried like someone mourning something still alive. Kelvin's disrespect did not arrive as one shocking moment. It grew through little humiliations that others dismissed as jokes. During visits from friends, he corrected Peace harshly, spoke over her, and turned her opinions into entertainment. "Ignore her," he told Ben one evening when Peace mentioned a design idea for a guest lounge they had seen at an event. "Her head is always in the clouds." Ben laughed loudly. "That's why men must keep women grounded." Kelvin grinned at the approval, and Peace forced a smile that made her cheeks ache. Nobody in the room noticed how tightly her fingers curled around her glass, or how carefully she swallowed the hurt. A week later, at a family dinner, the same pattern returned. Tracy asked Peace what she had been up to lately, and Peace hesitantly mentioned a hospitality course she wanted to take. "That sounds interesting," Tracy said warmly. But Kelvin scoffed before Peace could continue. "Interesting for what? To decorate fantasy with certificates?" The room went awkwardly quiet. Tracy looked uncomfortable. Peace lowered her eyes and folded her napkin. "It's just something I'm considering," she said softly. Kelvin shook his head. "Waste of money." Tracy changed the subject, but the damage had been done. For the rest of the evening, Peace barely spoke. Tracy noticed, and something troubled settled in her chest. Even with Kelvin's mockery hanging over her, Peace refused to completely bury her dream. Quietly, almost secretly, she began saving little amounts of money. She bought fewer clothes, avoided unnecessary expenses, and tucked each spare note into an envelope hidden beneath old wrappers in her wardrobe drawer. It was not much, but it belonged to hope. Every time she slipped money into that envelope, she felt a small, stubborn part of herself still breathing. The savings were for a hospitality and catering certification she had researched carefully. She never told Kelvin, not because she was deceitful, but because she was tired of seeing her dreams shrink under the weight of his laughter. At night, when Kelvin slept or stayed out late, Peace watched hospitality videos on her phone with the brightness turned low. She read case studies about guest satisfaction, boutique hotel branding, and luxury service culture. Sometimes she imagined herself walking through a hotel lobby she owned, adjusting flowers, greeting guests, and checking that everything felt right. In those moments, she was no longer just a wife waiting for affection. She was a woman becoming something. Nobody applauded her. Nobody knew what she was building inside herself. But each quiet night of study gave her a sense of direction. It was fragile, private, and easily wounded, yet to Peace it felt like survival. Tanya Cole came into Kelvin's orbit through one of the business circles he had recently started frequenting. She was stylish, sharp-tongued, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to turning heads. Kelvin noticed first how easily she admired him. Where Peace had grown cautious and quiet around his moods, Tanya laughed at his stories, praised his ambition, and made him feel bigger than he truly was. She touched his ego in places Peace no longer entertained. "You're different from these ordinary men," she told him one evening at a lounge. Kelvin smiled too widely. He liked the way she looked at him, as though he were already more powerful than reality had proven. Peace did not know Tanya's name at first, but she felt the shift long before the face arrived. Kelvin started spending more time on his phone, smiling at messages he would not explain. He returned home later, dressed more carefully, and became impatient whenever Peace asked simple questions. One night, while adjusting his cufflinks, he said casually, "Some women understand presentation. That matters." Peace looked up from the bed. "Presentation?" Kelvin shrugged. "Nothing. Just saying." But she heard comparison in the sentence, and comparison is often the first shadow of betrayal. She said nothing more, yet a strange heaviness settled over her heart, like rain gathering before a storm. One Saturday morning, Kelvin came home unusually serious. He sat beside Peace and told her he had found a business opportunity that could change their lives. "I just need support now," he said, voice low and convincing. "Once this works, everything gets better." Peace listened with a cautious hope of a woman desperate for peace in her home. When he finally asked whether she had any money saved, her chest tightened. She thought of her envelope, of the course, of the dream hidden between small sacrifices. "It's for something important," she whispered. Kelvin held her hand. "And this is for us. I'll replace it. I'll even build you 10 hotels if I want." That sentence should have sounded generous, but it felt careless. Still, Peace went into the room, brought out the envelope, and placed it in his hands. Kelvin kissed her forehead and promised she would never regret standing by him. But when the door closed behind him, Peace sat in the bathroom and cried quietly, pressing a towel over her mouth so nobody would hear. The money itself was not the deepest pain. It was what it represented. She had sacrificed hope again, this time in the name of marriage. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she asked herself whether love was supposed to feel like slowly handing your future away piece by piece. A few weeks later, Peace decided to surprise Kelvin at a business lounge with food he loved. She dressed simply, carried the neatly packed meal, and rehearsed a soft smile on her way there. But the moment she entered the dimly lit lounge, everything inside her turned cold. Kelvin sat in a corner booth with a woman whose beauty was loud and polished. "Tanya," she leaned in too comfortably, her manicured fingers resting against Kelvin's arm, while he smiled in a way Peace had not seen in a long time. For a second, Peace could not move. Kelvin looked up, saw her, and instead of shame, his face showed irritation. "Peace? What are you doing here?" She stood there, clutching the food container as if it could hold her together. "I brought you dinner," she said quietly. Kelvin sighed, embarrassed more by her presence than by what she had witnessed. "This is Tanya," he said with cold politeness. Tanya smiled lightly. "Hi." Peace nodded, placed the food on the table, and left before the tears came. The drive home was a blur of shaking hands, blurred traffic lights, and a pain so sharp it felt physical. Later that night, Kelvin came home angry. "You embarrassed me," he snapped. Peace stared at him in disbelief. In that moment, she understood something devastating. Marriages often die long before the papers say so. After the lounge incident, Kelvin stopped making serious efforts to hide his carelessness. He still denied wrongdoing whenever Peace asked questions, but his behavior grew bolder, almost defiant. He stayed out later, spent more freely, and responded to her concern with irritation rather than explanation. Peace once asked gently, "Kelvin, is there someone else?" He looked at her with chilling impatience. "Maybe you should ask yourself why a man would even look elsewhere." The sentence hit her like a slap. She did not reply. She simply sat there, feeling something in her chest cave inward while Kelvin walked away, as though he had only stated a fact. That night, Peace stood before the mirror in their bathroom longer than usual. She studied her face, her body, the softness she had once worn proudly. She wondered if quietness had become weakness in Kelvin's eyes. She wondered whether she had faded without noticing. Then anger stirred beneath the hurt, small but alive. It frightened her, because it meant love was slowly losing ground to humiliation. In bed, Kelvin slept with his back turned toward her, while Peace stared into darkness, realizing that being ignored by a stranger would have hurt less. There is a cruelty that only intimacy can carry, and she was beginning to know it by name. One afternoon, Tracy visited unexpectedly and immediately noticed something wrong. Peace's smile came too late, her eyes looked tired, and there was a kind of careful quietness around her that did not feel natural. While making tea in the kitchen, Tracy finally asked, "Peace, what's happening?" At first Peace brushed it aside, but Tracy kept looking at her with honest concern. Something in that gaze made Peace's strength loosen. "I think Kelvin is with someone else," she admitted, voice trembling. Tracy lowered the cup in her hand and closed her eyes briefly. She looked more saddened than surprised, and that alone made Peace feel both comforted and broken. Tracy did not defend Kelvin the way family often does. Instead, she reached for Peace's hand and said softly, "Don't let anybody reduce your value because they are too blind to see it." Peace swallowed hard, holding those words like medicine she did not yet know how to trust. Tracy also mentioned someone named Clinton Bassey, an experienced hospitality consultant she had once met through a family friend. "He said you have an eye for detail," Tracy added. "He remembered the way you spoke at that dinner about service and atmosphere." Peace blinked in surprise. It seemed like a small comment, but after so much mockery, being remembered for talent felt strangely sacred. Not long after, Kelvin started sleeping in the guest room. It began after a tense argument, but Peace quickly realized it was not about needing space to cool off. He adapted too easily to the distance, as though he had wanted it for a long time. The house changed around them. Doors stayed shut, meals went uneaten. Even when Kelvin was present, he felt emotionally absent, like a visitor only passing through. Peace moved through the rooms as if she were living inside a waiting area where bad news had already been decided. The cruelty was not loud. It was quiet enough to make her doubt her own reality. One evening, unable to bear the tension any longer, Peace stood at the guest room door and asked, "What are we doing, Kelvin?" He looked up from his phone, expression unreadable. "Maybe we both need space to breathe," he said. The sentence was calm, but it was also dishonest. He said it as if the collapse belonged equally to both of them, as though he had not been withdrawing piece by piece. Peace felt something bitter rise in her throat. "Don't rewrite this," she whispered. Kelvin frowned. Not everything is an attack, but that was exactly what it was. He wanted distance without blame, betrayal without consequence, and Peace was beginning to see it. The suspicion Peace had tried to manage finally hardened into certainty. One night, Kelvin's phone rang after midnight. He stepped outside to answer, but the balcony door did not shut completely. Peace was not trying to eavesdrop, yet Tanya's familiar tone floated in clearly enough to expose the intimacy between them. Kelvin's voice softened in ways Peace had not heard in months. A few days later, she found a lipstick-stained receipt and a silk scarf in Kelvin's car, neither of which belonged to her. When she held up the scarf, Kelvin's response was rage, not guilt. "Why are you searching my car?" he barked. Peace stared at him, stunned by the audacity. The deepest wound came later. Peace was walking down the hallway one afternoon when she heard Kelvin on the phone in the study. "She doesn't understand the kind of woman I need," he said with a dismissive laugh. "Peace is too small-minded, too soft, too ordinary." She froze outside the door, every word entering her like a blade. This was the man who had once told her she made every room gentler. Now he was reducing her to an inconvenience. She went back to the bedroom quietly and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, realizing that whatever remained of the marriage now survived only through routine, memory, and denial. When Kelvin finally suggested separation openly, he did it with the polished language of a man trying to look reasonable. "I think some distance will help us," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Too much tension is unhealthy." Peace almost laughed at the cruelty hidden inside those calm words. The house they lived in had been shaped by her management, sacrifice, and emotional labor, yet Kelvin spoke as though it naturally belonged to him. He implied that leaving temporarily would keep peace. But even the way he stood told the truth. He was not asking for healing. He was making room for the life he wanted without the inconvenience of appearing like the villain. Packing was one of the most humiliating things Peace had ever done. She folded dresses, shoes, and old photographs with the numb care of someone preparing for a funeral. Tracy came by and burst into tears when she saw the boxes. "This is wrong," she said, glaring at Kelvin. But Kelvin remained cold, almost impatient, as though grief were an inefficiency delaying his plans. Peace carried only what she could take without argument. When she finally stepped outside, the air felt strange, too open, too final. She turned once toward the house and saw not home, but a place where she had slowly disappeared. Still, beneath the pain, something small inside her refused to die. Peace moved into the modest house of her widowed aunt, Sade, who lived in a quiet neighborhood far from the polished world Kelvin loved. The house was smaller, older, and simpler. But from the first night, Peace noticed something she had not felt in a long time: rest. There were no slammed doors, no cold silences thick with hostility, no need to rehearse every sentence before speaking. Yet safety felt unfamiliar. She lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for some invisible tension to arrive. When it did not, she cried softly into the pillow. Sometimes peace itself can feel foreign after too much pain, and that first night proved it to her. Auntie Sade was compassionate, but she was not indulgent. She listened as Peace finally told the fuller story, from the mockery to the betrayal to the humiliation of leaving her own home. When Peace finished, her aunt handed her a cup of tea and said, "Cry all you need, but don't build a house inside your pain." Peace looked at her through swollen eyes. "I don't know how to start again." Auntie Sade squeezed her hand. "You start by breathing, then by standing, then by moving." It was simple advice, but it landed deeply. For the first time, Peace began to imagine that survival might one day become something more dignified than merely enduring. Through Tracy's quiet help, Peace got an opportunity to work at a struggling guest house on the outskirts of the city. The pay was small, the building worn, and the staff tired from years of poor management. But the moment Peace walked through the property, something in her sharpened. She noticed the outdated curtains, the poor greeting habits, the lifeless reception desk, and the missed opportunities for warmth. She did not see ruin. She saw possibility. It was the first place she had entered in months that awakened her instead of depressing her. While others saw a tired guest house, Peace saw atmosphere, detail, and the beginning of forgotten ideas returning carefully to life. That was where she properly met Clinton Bassey, a consultant who came in occasionally to assess operations. He watched Peace one morning as she adjusted flower placement in reception and gently advised a cleaner on how to greet guests. Later he asked, "Have you worked in hospitality before?" Peace shook her head. "Not formally. I just notice things." Clinton smiled thoughtfully. "You notice the right things." The words settled softly inside her. For so long, male attention had only brought criticism or pain. Now a man was looking at her competence without mockery. Peace remained guarded, but when she walked home that evening, the world felt a little less closed around her. Peace threw herself into work and study with a desperation that almost looked like calm from the outside. By day, she helped improve room preparation, reception standards, and service routines at the guest house. By night, she read everything she could about luxury service, guest psychology, staff training, and hotel brand identity. Her old notebook returned, no longer just a hiding place for dreams, but a working document full of ideas, corrections, and structured plans. Each new lesson gave her a little strength back. She was still wounded, but knowledge began to do what pity could not. It gave her something to stand on besides memory, and that mattered more than she had words for. Still, growth did not erase grief. Some nights, after hearing from mutual acquaintances that Kelvin and Tanya were appearing everywhere together, Peace cried until her chest hurt. Some mornings, she woke with a hollow feeling so deep that even tea tasted like nothing. Yet, she kept moving. One evening, Auntie Sade found her studying with tired eyes and said, "Child, rest small." Peace smiled faintly. "If I stop, I'll think too much." Her aunt sighed. "Thinking won't kill you. Hopelessness will." Peace knew she was right, but work had become her ladder out of pain. She climbed it one exhausted step at a time, carrying grief and determination together. While Peace rebuilt quietly, Kelvin looked like a man winning at life. His photos with Tanya filled social media: expensive dinners, rooftop parties, weekend getaways, luxury cars, and smiling poses carefully curated for attention. Ben encouraged the display, clapping him on the back and saying, "Now this looks like the life of a serious man." Tanya, glamorous and self-assured, fit neatly into the image Kelvin wanted the world to believe. From the outside, they glittered. Peace saw some of the images accidentally and felt old pain rise again, but there was also something performative about them, a polished desperation hiding behind filtered confidence and loud happiness. Beneath the surface, Kelvin's golden season was already weakening. The business deal he had pushed so hard for never truly recovered, and some newer investments rested more on promises than substance. He spent heavily to maintain status, using appearance to cover instability. Tanya enjoyed his polished lifestyle without asking too many questions, and Kelvin preferred it that way. At a lounge one night, Ben raised a glass and said, "Men like us don't go backward." Kelvin laughed, but his smile tightened for a second too long. Even then, anxiety lurked beneath the performance. He was not building solid success. He was renting admiration, and the bill was slowly coming due. Months passed, and the guest house began improving in visible ways. Guests started leaving better reviews, commenting on the warmth of service, the careful touches in room presentation, and the more welcoming atmosphere. The owner, surprised by the steady change, gave Peace more responsibility. She designed simple check-in processes, trained junior staff on tone and attentiveness, and created small aesthetic improvements that cost little but changed the entire feel of the place. Clinton watched all this with growing respect. One afternoon, while they walked through the corridor, he asked, "What do you really want, Peace?" She hesitated, then answered honestly, "One day, I want to own a world-class hotel." She braced herself for polite laughter, but it never came. Clinton simply stopped walking and looked at her seriously. "Then stop speaking about it like a secret you're ashamed of," he said. Peace blinked. "It sounds impossible." He shook his head. Impossible dreams usually sound foolish until structure enters the room. They sat that evening with notepads and tea, and for the first time someone treated her dream like a real project instead of a feminine fantasy. They discussed location, financing, brand identity, service culture, and long-term operations. Peace went home trembling, not because success had arrived, but because respect had. Sometimes respect is the first miracle a broken heart receives. After that conversation, Clinton began introducing Peace carefully to people in hospitality and property circles. He did not overpraise her or try to rescue her. He simply opened doors where her competence could be seen. Through meetings, site visits, and endless notes, Peace learned how struggling properties were assessed, how investors thought, and how hotel deals were structured. The glamorous image of luxury hospitality began to reveal its true backbone systems: staffing, consistency, maintenance, trust. She loved it even more. Understanding the hard work behind elegance only made her dream feel more honest. Beauty, she realized, was not decoration alone. It was discipline made visible through care. Peace also started saving again, this time with deeper intention. Every naira carried memory. The money Kelvin had taken, the dream he had mocked, the woman she had once been. But now the savings no longer felt fragile. They felt purposeful. One evening, while reviewing notes, she told Auntie Sade, "I'm not doing this to prove anything to Kelvin." Her aunt nodded slowly. "Good, because revenge burns fast." Peace looked down at her notebook. "I'm doing it because I want myself back." That truth steadied her. She was not building toward dramatic victory. She was building toward restoration. And restoration, unlike revenge, had enough dignity to survive the long road ahead. One afternoon, Peace was assigned to assist with hospitality coordination at an event venue hosting a corporate mixer. She moved through the hall professionally, checking table settings and staff readiness, until a familiar voice froze her from behind. "Peace?" Kelvin stood there in an expensive suit, Tanya beside him in sleek confidence. For a brief second, surprise crossed his face, but it quickly rearranged into condescension. Tanya's eyes drifted over Peace's outfit and work file with quiet superiority. Kelvin gave a thin smile and said, "Life teaches everybody eventually." The sentence was so patronizing that Peace felt heat rise behind her eyes. Yet she only said good evening and kept moving. She held herself together until she reached home. Then the pain came in full. The humiliation of being looked down on by the man who had betrayed her reopened wounds she had thought were healing. Maybe he was right, she whispered once, sitting on the edge of her bed. Auntie Sade sat beside her immediately. "Don't ever let a cruel person become your narrator," she said firmly. Later Tracy called, furious when she heard what happened. "My brother is blind," she said. Peace listened, cried, and slowly steadied herself. The chapter did not end in triumph. It ended in realism. Healing had not failed. It had simply met an old wound and chosen not to die there. The opportunity that changed everything arrived quietly. A troubled luxury property, half-finished and bleeding money, came up for restructuring under a group of new investors. The project was ambitious, risky, and far above anything Peace could have imagined herself touching a year earlier. But Clinton believed she understood something essential that others missed. "These investors know money," he told her. "What they don't know is how a place should feel in human hands." "You do." Peace laughed nervously. "Clinton, people like that won't even take me seriously." He looked at her over his glasses. "Then speak until they have no choice." Fear sat with her all the way into the meeting room. When it was her turn, Peace rose with trembling calm and presented her vision. She spoke about warm luxury, emotionally intelligent service, elegant restraint, and the difference between impressing guests and truly receiving them. A beautiful hotel can still feel empty, she said. People remember how a place made them feel, not just what it looked like. The room grew attentive. One investor leaned forward. Another asked questions. Peace answered honestly, drawing not from theory alone, but from lived pain, observation, and discipline. By the end, the atmosphere had changed. She had entered the room feeling small. She left realizing something profound. Everything life had tried to break in her had quietly become the source of her rarest insight. The restructuring deal did not move like magic. It unfolded through delays, negotiations, revised projections, and long stretches of uncertainty. Peace had to prove herself repeatedly. She studied architectural drafts, reviewed room concepts, argued for better staff culture, and insisted the property must never feel cold or emotionally sterile. Luxury should not humiliate people, she said during one meeting. It should honor them. Some investors were skeptical at first, but Clinton backed her where it mattered. Slowly, her ideas gained weight. She worked until her eyes burned, often leaving sites covered in dust, her shoes tired, her mind full of measurements, lighting concepts, service workflows, and impossible deadlines. Those months changed her deeply. The unfinished building became a mirror for her own life. Beautiful in potential, messy in process, demanding in every possible way. She walked through hallways with exposed wires and raw walls, imagining chandeliers, flowers, polished marble, and soft music. Some nights she sat alone in the half-complete lobby and whispered to herself, "This will stand." Then fear would answer, "What if it doesn't?" But she kept returning. She learned to survive setbacks without collapsing, to lead without shouting, and to carry responsibility without losing tenderness. She was not just building a hotel anymore, she was slowly becoming the kind of woman whose presence could hold one together. As Peace's world rose carefully into form, Kelvin's began to wobble. One of his flashy deals failed publicly, and the ripple effects spread faster than he expected. Debts tightened around him. Investors who once took his calls with enthusiasm began replying more slowly. Ben still made loud speeches about bouncing back, but even he had started avoiding direct conversations about money. Kelvin dressed the same, smiled the same, and posted with the same swagger, yet there was desperation beneath it now. The life he had built on image was demanding substance, and he did not have enough. At home, Tanya started noticing the cracks in small but troubling ways. It began with delayed payments, then excuses, then unusual irritability. "You said that contract was secure," Tanya said one evening over dinner. Kelvin forced a smile. Business has ups and downs. But his tone lacked confidence. He became defensive whenever she asked normal questions, and that defensiveness chipped away at the illusion she had admired. Meanwhile, Peace was learning patience through construction, while Kelvin was learning panic through collapse. The contrast made the story sharper and more emotional. One was building quietly from pain. The other was sinking beneath performance. Still, Kelvin did not reflect honestly. He blamed timing, enemies, bad luck, anything but his own pride, carelessness, and hollow foundation. After years of work, sacrifice, setbacks, and sleepless nights, the hotel finally opened. It stood elegant and breathtaking, with refined architecture, soft lighting, polished floors, carefully chosen scents, and a warmth that no amount of money alone could have designed. Peace named it Aurelia Grand. The place quickly drew attention from the city's elite, travelers, and business circles. Reviewers praised not only the beauty, but the feeling something rare, calm, and deeply intentional. Guests commented on how seen they felt. Influential bookings followed, then waiting lists, then admiration that no one could dismiss as luck. Aurelia Grand became the kind of place people talked about even when they had never entered it. On the evening after a successful early week, Peace walked through the quiet lobby long after most guests had gone upstairs. She touched the polished reception desk and stood still for a long moment. The flowers were fresh, the lighting was perfect. Soft piano floated through the room exactly as she had once imagined in secret. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She remembered the envelope of savings, Kelvin's mocking laugh, the bathroom tears, the packed boxes, the tired guest house, and the dust-filled construction days. "You made it," Clinton said gently from behind. Peace smiled through tears. "No," she whispered. "I survived it." A few months after opening, Aurelia Grand secured a major high-profile weekend event that would attract investors, socialites, and ambitious business figures eager to be seen. It was the kind of gathering that could shape reputations. Kelvin heard about it through business networks and immediately decided he had to attend. His public image needed refreshing, and appearing at the city's most talked-about hotel would help. He booked an executive suite for himself and Tanya, intending to arrive in style and remind people he still belonged in important rooms. He had no idea who owned the hotel. To him, it was simply a powerful backdrop for performance, another place where he could wear confidence like tailored clothing. Peace reviewed the guest list in her office days before the event and felt her breath catch when she saw Kelvin Afolabi's name. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen, old pain rushing back so quickly it almost embarrassed her. Clinton, noticing the shift in her face, asked quietly, "Is it him?" She nodded. He waited, then said, "Then meet him as who you are now." Later, Tracy called, having heard Kelvin bragging about the event. "He has no idea," she said bitterly. Peace stood by her office window afterward, heart unsettled but steadying. The stage had been set, not by revenge, but by time, truth, and the slow architecture of consequence. The day of the event arrived with quiet grandeur. Staff stood polished and alert. The lobby glowed under soft gold lighting, every flower arranged perfectly, every detail carrying Peace's signature sense of elegance. Then Kelvin walked in with Tanya on his arm, laughing too loudly, his suit expensive, his confidence carefully performed. Tanya looked striking and self-assured, glancing around with the satisfaction of someone entering a place she believed belonged to people like her. Kelvin's smile lasted exactly until he looked toward reception. There, standing in a wine-colored tailored suit with calm authority, was Peace. For one suspended second, the entire room seemed to narrow around the shock on his face. Peace did not flinch. She stepped forward with composed grace, every movement controlled, every emotion tucked neatly behind professionalism. "Welcome to Aurelia Grand, Mr. Afolabi," she said, her voice smooth and courteous. Then she added the words that seemed to slice straight through Kelvin's chest. "Hope you enjoy your stay." Tanya looked from Peace to Kelvin, sensing a history larger than discomfort. Kelvin's fingers loosened at his side as his face drained of color. There was no shouting, no trembling, no desperate confrontation. That was what made the moment unbearable. Peace did not behave like a discarded wife. She behaved like the owner of the world he had just entered as a guest. Kelvin could not settle after checking in. The suite was magnificent, expansive windows, polished finishes, subtle scent diffusers, luxury that whispered instead of screaming, but none of it comforted him. Every detail felt like proof of something he did not want to name. Tanya tried to dismiss the encounter. "Maybe she's just management," she said, though even she did not sound convinced. Kelvin began asking discreet questions at the front desk, to event staff, even to a waiter he had met downstairs. Each answer landed harder than the last. Peace was not a ceremonial face, not a minor investor, not decoration. She had built Aurelia Grand. She led it. The dream he once laughed at had become a landmark. Meanwhile, Peace held herself together through disciplined restraint. Seeing Kelvin again had reopened scars she had thought were fully sealed. Alone in her office, she pressed her fingers against the desk and breathed carefully. "You okay?" Clinton asked softly from the doorway. Peace nodded once, then admitted, "I hate that it still hurts." Clinton's voice was gentle. "Strength is not the absence of feeling. It's what you choose while feeling it." Those words steadied her. She returned to the event floor composed but not untouched. That chapter belonged to silent power, not because pain had vanished, but because Peace refused to let pain drag her backward into the version of herself Kelvin thought he still knew. That evening, during the formal event program, Peace was invited on stage to speak about the vision behind Aurelia Grand. The ballroom shimmered with elegant decor, crystal glassware, and the low hum of wealthy conversation. Kelvin sat beside Tanya, rigid and deeply unsettled, while Peace walked to the podium in calm dignity. When she began speaking, her voice carried neither bitterness nor apology. She spoke of a woman who once carried a dream in silence, who imagined a place where weary people could feel human again. Then her tone deepened. She spoke of mockery in the place that should have protected her, of savings taken, of love humiliated, of betrayal layered over ambition like dust over broken glass. The room slowly went still. Nobody needed names. Truth has a way of identifying itself. Peace never once looked directly at Kelvin, yet every sentence found him. "Sometimes," she said, "the place where your dream is laughed at becomes the place you must leave in order to hear yourself clearly again." Tanya's expression changed first, subtle but unmistakable. She began connecting the story to the man beside her. Kelvin stared ahead, face tense, unable to hide behind charm. Guests who knew him from business circles started glancing quietly in his direction. He was being exposed without accusation, seen without spectacle. It was not scandal that defeated him in that moment. It was the unbearable dignity of truth. After the speech, Tanya confronted Kelvin in the privacy of their suite. She had removed her heels, but not her disbelief. "Is what she said about you?" she asked, arms folded tightly. Kelvin tried to recover his usual confidence. "Peace is being dramatic. Things were complicated." Tanya stared at him. "Did you mock her dream?" He hesitated. "That's not how it was." "Did you take her money?" she pressed. "Did you leave her feeling like nothing?" Kelvin grew irritated. "You don't know the full story." Tanya laughed bitterly. "Neither did I. That's the problem." For the first time since they met, Kelvin looked less like a prize and more like a man stripped of polish. What unsettled Tanya most was not Peace's success. It was the kind of man Kelvin had revealed himself to be beside that success. She had believed she was with a strong man who moved on from a weak marriage. Now she saw someone who had stood in the way of goodness and still failed to become great. "I thought you chose better," she said quietly. "Now I think you just wounded someone who deserved better." Kelvin snapped back defensively, but every explanation sounded selfish and small. Tanya's admiration cracked beyond repair. The emotional shift was devastating because it happened without drama. A man she once gloried in had suddenly become painfully ordinary in the worst possible way. The following day, one of the event highlights included a private unveiling of the hotel's most prestigious accommodation. Guests gathered near the upper-level corridor. Cameras ready, curiosity high. Peace stood before the beautifully carved doors and announced the name, the Second Chance Suite. The title sounded luxurious on its own, and several guests smiled appreciatively. But Peace did not leave it there. She spoke about what the name meant. "This suite honors the second chance some of us must give ourselves," she said. "When life fails us, love fails us, and trust collapses. It celebrates choosing to live beautifully anyway." Her words moved through the corridor like soft thunder, elegant and devastating at once. Kelvin stood at the back, unable to breathe properly. For the first time, he understood the full size of what he had destroyed, not just a marriage, but a dream he had no right to mock. Tanya, listening beside him, felt something turn final inside her. When the guests moved forward to admire the suite, she remained still for a moment, then said quietly, "I can't do this anymore." Kelvin turned sharply. "Tanya." She shook her head. "I don't want to stand beside this kind of man." She walked away before he could stop her. And so, Kelvin was abandoned inside the very building that proved Peace had never needed his permission to become extraordinary. Before checking out, Kelvin asked to speak with Peace privately. She agreed, not from softness, but from closure. They met in a quiet lounge off the lobby where evening light filtered through tall glass windows. Kelvin no longer looked grand. The arrogance had drained from him, leaving behind fatigue, regret, and something close to shame. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. Peace looked at him steadily. "Then say the truth." He swallowed hard. "I was cruel. I didn't see you. I didn't know." Peace let out a slow breath. "No, Kelvin. You knew enough. You just did not care." The words were calm, but they left no room for escape. He tried to apologize again, but Peace had already traveled too far emotionally to meet him where he stood. She had mourned him in lonely rooms, in public silence, in dusty corridors, and in unfinished hallways. What remained now was not romantic longing but clarity. "You came here expecting admiration," she said quietly. "Instead, you had to witness what I became after you tried to bury me." Kelvin lowered his head, unable to answer. Peace rose gracefully and left him there with the full weight of his own choices. Later that evening, she stood once more in the grand lobby she had once drawn in secret, whole at last, while Kelvin exited it smaller than he entered. We've come to the end of the story. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification. Thank you so much for watching.